doing what your heart rings true, allowing hope to guide you through.
Hi, I'm Paul Lyndon Birtwell, and this is Reasonable Faith's Compelling Reason, a talk show where we interview some of the leading Christian thinkers, teachers, evangelists, and apologists in the world today. Today, I am more than honoured to have with me Greg Koukl. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, and thank you so much for including me in the august lineup that you have in this program. I'm glad to make my contribution here to the good people in your good country.
Oh, thank you very much. Could we begin by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your ministry?
Yeah, sure. I've been a Christian for about 48 years, but I was not really raised a Christian. I was raised kind of in a church, but it wasn't any vibrant Christian relationship with God kind of thing. Like a lot of people, I just kind of went through the motions. And then when I became 18, in the mid-60s, I decided, well, this isn't for me. And there were lots of other appealing things, more appealing things than religion and purity and all of that stuff, you know, as an 18-year-old kind of venturing into his world. And so I left what I thought was Christianity for about 6 or 7 years. And then when I was 23 years old and I was a student at UCLA, I began to take more seriously the claims that Jesus made about himself, the claims he made about the world, and the claims he made of my own life. And began to think about them and asked a lot of questions, and the standard common questions that we'll probably be discussing a bit here, and that I'm sure you cover with other guests on your program. And I pushed back a lot, and I left the table. Then I came back to the table and asked more questions. And I'll just tell you, Paul, after a period of time, I just came to the understanding. It took a little time for me, but I just came to the understanding that Jesus got it right, that he saw the world the way it really was, and that the way he described the world and the way the whole biblical view of reality was resonated with my deepest intuitions about the nature of reality itself. There was a fit. And so I had to make a decision. I could walk away or I could walk with Jesus, and that's when I decided to become a follower of Jesus. And that's been now almost half a century, and there's been a lot of adventures. I will say, quite honestly, it has not been easy. It has not been easy, but Jesus said as much. But it's been reality, and it has absolutely transformed everything about my life and the way I look at life. So about 28 years ago now, I decided to take my efforts and focus them on making a defense for Christianity. In other words, answering the questions and challenges people had, and then also giving positive evidences in favor of Christianity. And when I say in favor of Christianity, I don't mean just like a religious sect, a group, or a religious view. What a religious view is a take on reality. It's a description of the way the world actually is. And so what I am trying to help people to see is this particular take on reality actually fits reality, and turns out to be the best explanation for the way things actually are. And so I think this is was very compelling to me as a young man trying to figure out what is actually true, not just what I want and not just what I like, but what is the nature of the world. And it's, I think, one of the most compelling reasons that people should take the Christian worldview seriously. And that effort 28 years ago was called Stand to Reason. And so I started this organization, and now 28 years into it, with a lot of public speaking and some books and a big staff, 18 people. And maybe that's not big for some people, but it's big for us. And we have speakers that travel the world and represent Christ. And so these are all parts of things that are important to us and are important to our making a difference for Christ. And it's really what makes my life tick right now, not just professionally, but it's, strictly speaking, it's my life, because these are life issues. They aren't just jobs.
Yeah. So you mentioned there that you kind of started on a journey of discovery, a journey of investigation of the Christian faith. For some viewers who are watching today, perhaps they want to start on that journey too. What advice would you give to them?
Well, this is a very good question, and my answer is going to be different than a lot of people that maybe you're interviewing and that I know for whom apologetics, particular issues of defending the faith, etc., made a big difference. That wasn't the case for me. It wasn't until after I became a Christian that I discovered a lot of the particular answers to my challenges and a lot of the particular evidences in favor of the truthfulness of the Christian worldview. What happened to me, though, this is a really important part, is there was a time in my life when I was willing to say, okay, I want to know what's true.
Sure.
All right. For a long time I didn't want to know what was true. I wanted to know whatever I could find out that would reinforce what I wanted for me in my life. So I'll just give you an example here. I was a moral relativist at the time, in the late 60s and early 70s, and that means I did not believe in objective morality. Now, this is very convenient, by the way, because it means that I can do whatever I want and nobody can say I'm wrong. That was the great appeal. However, I was also marching against the war in Vietnam at the time, and the reason I was against the war is because I said it was an immoral war. Now, there's a dramatic pause there for a reason, because as you notice, I can tell by the look on your face, and others may be thinking, wait a minute, there's a contradiction here. On the one hand, you say there is no objective morality. On the other hand, you're saying that this war is immoral. You can't have it both ways. Either there is no objective morality and nothing is immoral, including my behavior, or some things are immoral because there is objective morality, and that might include some of my behavior. Okay, so notice how I was willing to live with a tension because of the payoff it gave me personally. I was aware of the contradiction, but I was dismissive of it because I didn't care about the truth. At that point, I cared about me, what I wanted. So it was a deeply narcissistic perspective, which frankly I think a lot of people are committed to nowadays. But this goes back thousands of years. I mean, this is the condition of man. We are concerned about self first. And so what happened, there was a point in my time in my life, Paul, where I came to a crossroads, and essentially I said, I want to know what's true. That's what began to make the big difference in my life. When I was willing to let my guard down, an inappropriate guard, a self-serving narcissistic guard down, and say, okay, what's reality actually like? Now, those aren't the words I used at that time, but that's the way I understand what I was doing. And so I would suggest, and I actually prayed a prayer, and not being a believer, and it wasn't becoming a believer, but I was out in the field in a military base, because I was in the military at the time in the summer of 1973. And I said, essentially, God, if you're real, and Jesus is who my friends, my brother in particular, is telling me he actually is, then I want to know that. If this is the truth, then I want to know that. Now, there was no, lightning or flashing or coconuts falling from the tree or anything. It was just a guy praying. But it was probably the first genuine and sincere prayer that I'd ever prayed. And after I prayed that willingness to be open, that God started to work in very profound ways that persuaded me of the truthfulness of Christianity, even though all of my questions and challenges had not been answered. Okay, and I have discovered since then that I'm not the only person who's prayed a prayer like that. There are lots and lots and lots of people for whom that prayer was a really vital part of their journey to come to a relationship with God through Jesus of Nazareth. And so my recommendation for others, they can, listen to Bill Craig, Dr. William Lane Craig. They can listen to my podcasts at Stand to Reason, or a host of other things that are valuable to challenge their thinking about what worldview is actually true. But if their heart is not open to the truth, they will find shallow ways of dismissing all the evidence. This has been my observation. A person has to first deal with their own self and say, look, do I want the truth or do I want whatever I want? All right. And once they decide they want the truth, and they say to God, I want the truth, if you're there, and I didn't know whether God was there or not when I prayed that prayer. In fact, I even said, I feel like an idiot. I'm standing out here in the field talking to the sky. That's what that was part of my prayer. But I think that, Paul, is really, really a vital step for anyone in the process before they begin embracing other things.
So it's about having a right heart motivation, isn't it? And being open and honest with truth and...
Yes, right.
Tearing all the facade away, really. Yeah.
There's a price to pay for changing your mind on any important issue and changing it for the truth, okay? Because the truth is not particularly popular. No. And especially this truth today is not particularly popular. No. But that doesn't mean it's not the truth, just because lots and lots of people dismiss it.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned, we talked about truth. What is truth? Jesus. You talked about Jesus quite a lot in your introduction, and that's amazing. But there are a lot of people in the UK, perhaps today, who would say, well, what evidence is there that even Jesus existed? Was he a real person? Did he really do the things that the Bible claims that he did? What's your take on that?
Well, this is actually very easy to answer. And I have support from a very well-known, vigorous critic of Christianity. His name is Bart Ehrman. He's one of the top scholars in the world on the issue of the biblical documents, okay? And his mentor was Bruce Metzger, who was #1 in the world. He co-authored a second edition of the text of the New Testament. I mean, this guy knows his stuff. No, he's not a Christian. He used to be, but he's not. But when he was confronted with this particular question during a Q&A, and I watched the video, that an atheist said, well, I have no reason to believe Jesus ever existed. He stopped him very aggressively. And he said, don't talk like that. Because and this is Bart Ehrman saying, there is not a scholar in the world in the area of New Testament studies or the life of Jesus or that period of time in history who believes what you just said. And the reason they don't believe it, that there's no evidence for Christ, is because there's abundant evidence that matters to historians. Okay? Now, some people say, oh, yeah, that's the Bible, and then they want to be dismissive of it. But the New Testament didn't even exist as a New Testament book until about the 4th or 5th century. All the documents existed, but they weren't brought together. So the New Testament is a library. It's not just one book. And in that library are records, primary source historical documents that are classically known as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that are independent and co-validating witnesses to the life of Jesus that give lots and lots of detail. And this is the kind of thing that Bart Ehrman was saying. He said, of course Jesus was an historical figure. Of course we know all kinds of details about his life. I wrote a book on it, he said. And then he chastised the atheist, and he said, don't keep talking like that. Because when you say things like that, you just sound foolish. So the academic issues, the academic evidence is in. Now, Bart Ehrman doesn't believe every single thing that's written there, and there are reasons that academics are going to dismiss certain parts, and that has to do with their own presuppositions, and that's another issue. But as to their general historical reliability, this is not an issue among academics in the field studying that kind of stuff. And I think Bart Ehrman, the agnostic/atheist critic of Christianity, for putting those facts out on the table in such a clear way. There is no good reason to reject the basic historical information about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a man of history.
Well, we get a lot of our information of Jesus, of course, from the 4 Gospels, and we get segments of Jesus's life throughout the epistles and also the book of Revelation. There are many people who are aware of the manuscript evidence that we have. There are literally tens of thousands, I believe, of manuscripts.
Yes.
that confirm the New Testament. However, within these manuscripts, there are also literally thousands of errors. And so people will point to these errors and say, well, you can't trust the New Testament documents because they're so full of errors. Now, once again, what's your take on that one?
Well, this is also a hobby horse of Bart Ehrman, okay? And Bart actually writes in two different arenas. He writes in the academic arena, and he also writes in the popular arena. And in his popular books, he plays this tune very aggressively, okay? But in his academic work, when he knows his peers are looking over his shoulder, he is much more reserved about his conclusions about the differences you cite. So he's actually right, and so are the critics. There are something like 300,000 words in the New Testament, and there are more than 400,000 variants. Now, you use the word error. That's actually technically not accurate because not all the variants are errors. I mean, somewhere there is an accurate rendering, presumably, but let's just call them what the scholars call them, variants. That means there are differences between the different manuscripts. And the reason there's so many differences is because there's so many manuscripts. Yeah. So the bad news is kind of the good news. You have tens of thousands of manuscripts. You have Greek manuscripts. These are all written, by the way, handwritten manuscripts. And so that's why you're going to have variations. We didn't have printing press until 1,500 years later, right? And so you're going to have variations. People make little mistakes, and there are going to be differences. And by the way, any difference is counted as a variant. So when you hear 300,000 words and 400,000 variants, it sounds like you can't trust a single word in the New Testament. But that's not the way it works. When one looks more closely at what the details are, and here the devil is in the details, it turns out that that most of the variants, the vast majority of the variants, are spelling differences. All right. So if one document has, we'll just use the English for the sake of illustration, has Jesu, Jesu, which is the way some languages pronounce Jesus, Jesu Cristo, that's Spanish. We say Jesus Christ. One says Jesu and one says Jesus. It adds the S. Yeah. Listen, there's no confusion about what that word means, whether it's spelled with the S or not. All right? But every single time the S is dropped, I'm just thinking conceptually here, that's considered a variant. Yeah. If it is dropped 10,000 times, that's 10,000 variants that mean absolutely nothing. Yeah. Okay. So the vast majority of all of those variants are variants like that. All right. And that means that the variation makes no difference to us capturing the original text. And that's what we're after here. What did the original say? So we can sweep away a massive number of those variants. Other ones are not spelling errors, but are things like when James's name might be there, and sometimes this has an article. So it says, and James did such and so. Or it might say, and the James did such and so. Yeah. It's pretty clear that the added to James makes no difference in the meaning and in recapturing the original meaning. So I'm just giving two examples there. I don't want to be tedious with so many examples, but it turns out that when you remove all of those absolutely inconsequential differences, when I say absolutely inconsequential, they have no bearing on us regaining the original. Then you have a much smaller group left. But it turns out a lot of those differences are valid differences, but we can figure out which one's the right one. If you have 10 passages that says James and then one that says the James, to use that illustration again, well, we know that the 10 are probably, and they're earlier manuscripts, well, those guys are probably right, and this is the mistake. So this removes a whole bunch more. Okay, and then the ones that you're not sure of, most of those don't make any difference to any detail of meaning of the text. Whether, and then when you, so each time you go through these variants, you can whittle away more as to their significance to regaining the original. Yeah. All right. And so once you do all of that, there's almost nothing left of significance. What's left? The long ending of Mark, Well, everybody knows that that's probably added later. The woman caught in adultery that we find in John chapter 6 and 7 and 8 starts in 7, and comes in 8. Thanks for that help. But that, we know that's not in the oldest documents, okay? And so we know that. And so does Bart Ehrman. The point is, we are able to reconstruct using the skills that somebody like Bart Ehrman has to weed out the things that we have very high confidence don't belong there, so that what's left is the heart and soul of the original document. And Bart Ehrman acknowledges that to be the case, especially in his academic work. There is nothing that is contested of significance, certainly theological significance or historical significance, about Jesus as to being able to reconstruct the original. Nothing is in question there. Even the stuff in the long ending of Mark, except for the snake handling stuff, you've got that repeated in other areas, that there is no question about the legitimacy of the documentation there. So this turns out to be, Paul, a kind of common canard that people raise to create doubt.
Sure.
And even Bart Ehrman has done it in his popular works. But I don't think he's done it licitly, because in his more academic works, he's much more reserved and more careful because he knows people are looking over his shoulder. The fact is, we don't have any good academic reason, with the abundance of manuscript evidence that we have in our possession now, to doubt that what we have in the record is substantially accurate, certainly in all the theological or historical points.
Which is the important thing, really, is that we can get back to the theology of the first century church.
Yes. There's no question about that at all. I was talking with a young lady yesterday about some manuscript says that these demons cannot be cast out unless you have prayer and fasting, and another account says just prayer. It left out the fasting. Well, was fasting in there or not? And I said, I don't know, but I hope it wasn't in there, because I don't like fasting. I'd rather just pray. But you see how that's not a really relevant factor in the big picture. I mean, if you're into demons, casting demons out, that might matter, but this is hard, not even a tertiary issue in Christianity. That's way off in the distance. The main things, the plain things, are solidly attested to by reliable documents from antiquity.
Okay, so a lot of people also say, if we add to that Jesus, he existed. Jesus was a great speaker. He was a great rabbi, a great storyteller. But he wasn't deified as God until centuries later by the Roman Catholic Church. A lot of people say that in the UK. It was the Roman Catholic Church that invented the God-man rather than just the man. So biblically, is that a sound argument, or are there some holes in that?
Well, you just threw me a softball, so thank you for that. It's not a solid argument. There are a lot of holes in it. All right. This is basically Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown kind of stuff. And so I have a question here that I'm going to ask a person who raises that. And my question is, why would you believe that what you just told me is an accurate account of things?
Okay.
Now, I would presume that someone who makes this claim that Jesus was a man of history and a great this, that, and the other thing, which is common because people like Jesus, right? But he wasn't this God-man. He wasn't this savior of the world, et cetera, okay? That was invented later. And so that's a very strong claim. Okay, fair enough. I'm not threatened by it. Why would you think that's the way? Now, this is a very important question that every thoughtful person has to ask. If they're confronting the challenge or they're offering the challenge, why would anybody believe that? Okay, this idea that Jesus was kind of an ordinary man and he was somehow deified 300 years later. maybe by the Roman Catholic Church or somebody. All right. There was no Roman Catholic Church 300 years later, by the way. The Roman Catholic Church, as we know it, is probably 6th, 7th century. All right. That was the ascendancy of Rome into this strong, monolithic representation of Christianity. So before there wasn't the church. So let's just look at the history. That's the question. Why is it? So here's another question that goes to this issue. Why is it that people believe, these people raising the objection, that Jesus was a good man, a good prophet, a good rabbi? Well, because just look what he said and what he did. Well, wait, where are you looking at what he said and what he did? You're not looking at Pliny or Tacitus or Josephus or some of these others that make references to Jesus and to Christianity that kind of confirm and validate aspects of the Gospels. You are looking at the primary source documents themselves, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And because that's the place where you get any detail about Jesus. Yeah. So if a person is going to have an opinion about Jesus that's robust in any sense, they have to gain that opinion from some record of Jesus' life. And there are only 4 detailed records of Jesus' life, and I just mentioned them. That's the canonical Gospels, okay? But the problem with drawing a good conclusion about Jesus the man and the prophet and the rabbi and the great teacher from those canonical Gospels is that those very Gospels say a whole bunch more than that. Because this isn't what Jesus believed about himself, not according to the testimony. Okay? The language that he used to describe himself got him killed. Yeah. It was not his political action or his advocacy for the poor or any of that. We have a record of the trial. He made a claim about himself that he was the Son of God. Yeah. That's blasphemy. And by the way, this claim was made from beginning to end. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize it, is the leadership wasn't trying to kill Jesus at the end of his life. They started to try to kill at the very beginning of his life. All right? And at that time, it wasn't just the leadership writ large over Israel. It was a local leadership of a community worship service, in the synagogue. Jesus was preaching, and that made him so mad they almost drove him off a cliff, to stone him. That was right in the beginning. It's Matthew 4 or something like that. So that was why. Why were they trying to kill this guy? A couple of reasons, but what they got him on was his claim to be God. Now, some people are thinking, wait, no, he claimed to be the Son of God. Well, keep in mind, we're 2,000 years removed from the circumstances, right? And so people claim to be sons of God all over. Now, it never raises an eyebrow, all right? But back then, in a Jewish community with Torah-observant Jews, which Jesus was, by the way, you don't make a claim like that frivolously. That is blasphemous, because to claim to be the Son of God is to claim to have a divine nature. Okay, you are a son of your father. You share the same nature as your father, Paul. So do I. Yeah. We both have human natures. God is unique. He has a divine nature. He has a son. The son has the same divine nature. This is blasphemous. And they understood this. Why are you wanting to stone me, Jesus said. This is the record, right? And he said, what good work? He said, not for a good work, but you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Okay, so this record that allows us to draw great opinions about Jesus as the man is thick with references to his divine nature. And think of the claims that he made. Now, we want to say this is a great teacher, prophet, and all this. Okay, this is the man who said, not my teaching, I am the bread of life. He who eats from this bread will never die. I am the living water. You drink from this, not my teaching, me. You drink from this water, you will never thirst. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And after he said that, he walked out and he raised a man from the dead who had been in the grave for 3 days and was rotting and stinking. That's Lazarus. Okay, so the point I'm making is, our viewers can draw whatever conclusion that they want about Jesus of Nazareth from the record. And they can walk away from him if they want, or they can embrace him. But if we want to be intellectually honest, we have to embrace the man as he was and presented himself. We can't just cherry pick, because if this man was not who he claimed to be, then he's not a good man. He's a liar, or worse.
Yeah.
And one of your wonderful countrymen, C.S. Lewis,
yes,
made this point in a very lucid way, and his point was that you can't have it in between. That option is not left open to us, and Jesus did not intend to leave it open to us. Okay, the ancient dictum in Latin is aut deus, aut homo malus. In other words, either God or a bad man. Nothing in between.
Nothing in between. Excellent. Yeah, sums it up. Brilliant. So in the UK today, we were talking a little bit just before the interview about the kind of the state of the church in the UK, that is very listless, it's very apathetic in not all areas, of course, but I would say as a majority view that I see, this is my own personal take on things. And in many places today, the church has gone what we would call the seeker-sensitive route, which is basically, for those viewers who don't know what that is, it's basically don't talk about sin, don't talk about hell, don't talk about anything that could potentially upset anybody from coming to church. And so basically the gospel is stripped of all of that, and Jesus is really presented as a social justice warrior. In other words, doing these good works and kind of fighting poverty and fighting this and rallying for this. Is Jesus SJW, or biblically, where is Jesus in this?
I have a lot to say about that. Actually, you're right. It's a very common way to go. Let me say something about seeker-sensitive churches. Okay, one would think that what this means is that there is a group of people who are seeking what? What are they seeking? I think originally this term meant to describe those who are seeking the truth. They're hungry. They realize their lives are not satisfying, living for themselves. There's something bigger than themselves. What is that? What is the truth I'm seeking? So this is seeking. These are people that are saying, what I'm not big enough as a center for the universe. Something bigger than me is what I need to attach myself to. What is that? Okay. So what seeker-sensitive churches end up doing is they end up giving the so-called seeker what he just acknowledged wasn't adequate. Oh, well, I'm going to give you the things that make you feel good and blah, 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 blah. Wait, if there's a real seeker, those people need the truth. Okay, and that's the truth that Jesus gave. All right. So what really happens in most seeker churches is not a seeker-sensitive church, but rather, what's the right way to put this? They're not even sensitive, or what they are looking for is to provide a religion that will appeal to a consumer.
Yes. It's a marketed Christianity, yeah.
Yes, of course. It's got kind of the words that sound good. And what do you want? Oh, you don't want sin, they think. So we're not going to talk about that. We're not talking about anything that bothers you. We're going to talk. What is it you want us to talk about? You know, we talk about politicians like that who got their finger in the wind, and we don't respect people like that because they are not leaders. But this is what secret churches end up doing. They're putting their finger in the wind. What do people want? We'll give you what you want. You want to have a better marriage. You want to, we'll tell you how to have a good relationship. You want to do more for the poor. We'll help you to do that. Now, I'm not disparaging the work for marriage or the poor.
Sure.
But that is not what Christianity is all about. All right? And you mentioned the term social justice warrior. And a lot of people don't realize that social justice is actually a term of art that is part of a different worldview. It doesn't just mean helping the poor. It is a piece of a larger puzzle called critical race theory, CRT, that is consuming the universities right now and much of the population and even the church. Now, people don't necessarily have to get all up on CRT. That's a whole, but I'm just saying that it's a different worldview.
Yeah,
and it's a view that certain groups are oppressor groups and others are oppressed groups, and you, Paul, would be an oppressor just because you're a member of the group, even if you're the nicest guy in the world, and so it's group guilt, and what social justice is paybacks. Okay, it's what we give to the so-called oppressed groups to pay them back for having been oppressed. Now, I'm not taking on the worldview right now. I'm not saying good, better, or indifferent. I mean, I have my own concerns, obviously. But I'm just making the point, when Christians or anyone adopts that language, they are really promoting an understanding about how the world works. Okay, the biblical view is different. Okay, the biblical view is that there are poor people and there are some that are not poor. Okay, and the biblical view is not that people are poor as a result of injustice. Some people are just poor, okay? And we are to help them. Not because we owe them, but because we are charitable and love them.
Yeah.
Okay, think the Good Samaritan here kind of thing. So there's a proper concern for those who are down and out, but it's motivated by a completely different thing. It's motivated by love. The old word was charity. Okay, you don't hear that much anymore. It's motivated by love, not guilt. That's the new system. Yeah, but and it was to help those who needed the help. Okay, not because it was owed them. That's a government approach.
Yeah.
But it's because we want to help them individually. And so that's why so many great, wonderful things were done by Christians, like the end of slavery, famously William Wilberforce in your country and others in ours, and things like that. Wilberforce wasn't just famous for slavery, but for ending slavery as a lifetime work, but he created all kinds of organizations that were meant to help the poor as a result of his Christian convictions. So there is a legitimate place in the Christian worldview for helping those who need the help. But, and here's what's really important, that is not why Jesus came.
Yeah.
So I got really annoyed at what I thought was a distortion of his purpose, and I decided I'm going to go through all the Gospels, and I'm just going to find every single reference to social justice or helping the poor or anything that could be construed in that category.
Yeah.
Social gospel is the way it used to be described. Okay. So I started in the Gospel of John. When I got to the last verse of the Gospel of John, I had nothing on my paper.
Wow.
That means there was not, in the entire Gospel of John, there is not a single word that can be construed as Jesus championing the poor or the Christian's responsibility for so-called social justice or social gospel issues. That was a stunner. Does this mean that Jesus didn't care about it? No, that doesn't mean he didn't care about it. The Old Testament is filled with commands and affirmations of our responsibility for those who are poor before God. Okay, and Jesus held that view too, and so did the early church. But the reason it wasn't mentioned in the Gospel of John is because that isn't the reason that Jesus came. And that's why it could be completely left out of the Gospel of John. And it turns out it does not even appear very much in the synoptics, Matthew, Mark,
not
and
really.
Luke.
No.
It's with another stunner. You look at the great discourses of Jesus, the bread of life discourse, no mention. The upper room discourse, no mention. The Olivet discourse, no mention. Some things there in the Sermon on the Mount, but those have to be qualified. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Oh, well, that's something different, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, it turns out not to have been the main focus of Jesus. The main focus of Jesus was not what Christians do, but what Christ has done.
Yeah.
Now, this is just a matter, in a certain sense, of empirical examination of the historical texts. Yeah. Okay. I think this is wildly misconstrued regarding Jesus because people keep hearing it over and over and over again, and they don't go back to the primary source documentation to see, is this what actually took place? And the fact that one entire gospel, the last written gospel, the most sublime characterization, some would say, of the person and work of Christ, has no mention of any of that at all, ought to make it absolutely undebatable that this was not the reason that Jesus came, and it was not the main focus of his work. Rather, he was the reason he came, and he was the main focus of his work.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's such a kind of sad situation that kind of in many places in the UK that the church has kind of gone down that route. Some time ago, I heard a minister say that, and he said this from the pulpit, which was quite shocking. He said that if he preached what the Bible actually said, he wouldn't have a church. And then I spoke with another minister probably about 2 years ago, and I said, well, why as a church are you kind of going the seeker-sensitive route? He said, well, listen, Paul, I'm paid by a denomination, and I have to, when I take up that residency as a pastor, as a minister within that church from the previous minister, I cannot lose members of the congregation. I have to grow the congregation. And if I preach hard messages, people are going to leave, and if they leave, I'm going to lose my job. And so it's almost like a lot of ministers today are forced into preaching these soft messages to try and grow numbers. And it's such a vicious circle for them.
No, it is vicious, but nobody is forced. They are making a choice.
Oh,
Why
absolutely.
don't we have burlesque on the stage? Why don't we just have burlesque? Why don't we have a bunch of girls dancing around? That'll bring a lot of people in. Okay,
that's
if
true.
you just want numbers, all right. That is, it's so offensive to me, and I know it is for you, Paul. And I think your listeners are reflecting on circumstances in their own communities that are examples of this. Okay. What do we think of people who do that? I mean, just outsider. I'm just thinking from an outsider's perspective. Okay, I'm thinking of the church. Okay, if I was an outsider, say you're a guy who gets up there to preach about religion, and what you're really preaching about is just stroking people's feelings and trying to help. You're just trying to get a lot more people into your church because now you're getting a lot more money. I mean, that's discreditable in terms of a pastor's purpose. And if the denomination requires that they keep adding more people, because that brings in more money, obviously, then he's in the wrong denomination if he cares about what Christ cares about.
Absolutely.
And that's the critical thing.
Yeah.
We serve an audience of one, not an audience of 1,000 or 2,000 or 4,000 or 8,000. We serve an audience of one. Now, I have a suspicion, and I'm thinking about the citation you offered from the pastor just a moment ago. If I preached what the Bible said, I wouldn't have a congregation. What you wouldn't have, Pastor, is the congregation you have.
You have, yes.
You would have a different congregation. And I know that because under the most extreme circumstances imaginable, from the 1st to the 4th centuries, Christians preached that message, the biblical message, and they transformed the Roman Empire as a result. That is the power of the truth, but they suffered at the same time. So there is a price to pay for speaking the truth. Yeah. This message changes lives, and it draws people in. You want a church with vibrant people, excited people, you preach the truth. You preach nonsense, and you're going to get people who believe nonsense and live lives of nonsense. That's okay?
True. Yeah. 100%. Okay, we're going to change gear a little bit now.
All right.
Growing up, well, obviously outside of Christianity, I was influenced by kind of two people. The first is Elvis Presley. I was raised on Elvis Presley music.
Kidding.
In my home. No, my mum absolutely loved Elvis. I think she only ever played Elvis in the home. It was like nothing. Even the Beatles wasn't allowed on in our house. So
but just a quick question though. When
Yeah.
you say you were influenced, do you just say that something about the music had an impact on your life, or you just really liked it a lot? Because I
think both. I think both. I think his gospel music was absolutely. To me personally, I don't think anybody can sing "How Great Thou Art" better than Elvis Presley. So that's my opinion on that one. So.
No, well, it's hard to argue with that.
Incredible. And the second person,
I was a kid when Elvis was, on his ascendancy. Oh,
the second person is this guy. Okay, so
that a cigar box there, brother.
Yeah, this is. These are all of the DVDs of Columbo. Every episode.
My gosh.
Now the reason I'm
hardcore.
I'm hardcore, that's right. And some years ago, I was introduced to this book that you wrote, and somebody talked about the Colombo Tactic. I said, well, what's that then? Because I was kind of, I love Columbo, kind of raised on Columbo, watched it kind of, I think it was on Saturday mornings and stuff. It was on TV, we used to watch it. And there's something in here called the Colombo Tactic, or the Colombo Technique,
right.
Yeah? Can you talk to us a little bit about Tactics, this amazing book that's transformed so many people's lives, and about the importance, I'd say, of communication when we're sharing our faith with unbelievers?
Yeah, of course. And by the way, somebody might have noticed the subtitle of the book. It's a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. There it is, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. So what I did is I was very, I would like to say I had an epiphany at some point in my life that revealed all of these things that I'm about to share now. But it really was a process over a long period of time of engaging lots of people on spiritual matters. And I've spoken to more than 80 college and university campuses around the country and in the UK and other parts of the world. And I realize, and it's tough dealing with people, because you're talking about very, very personal matters that have people have very strong opinions about, and they're important. All right, so we're not just talking about Super Bowl, who's the better quarterback. We're talking about really important things. Okay, not to denigrate that, but just say there's just a different world there, and so consequently, the Bible has something to say. The New Testament writers have something to say about how we navigate, in these conversations, and that we're supposed to do it graciously, with gentleness and with reverence. Let your speech always be with grace. I mean, man, where'd that come from? Kind of thing. This Lord's bondservant is not to be quarrelsome. Well, see, a lot of Christians haven't figured this one out. And they get in fights. And my rule is, if anybody gets mad, then I lose. Right? You're not going to persuade people who are angry. It doesn't work that way. So, and I would get in a lot of fights. So I learned this lesson the hard way. And I began to realize that there is power in navigating with questions. There is power in navigating with questions. And as I began to think about the process and see how I was actually working more effectively, I realized that there's some steps to this process. And so I formalized it, so to speak, in this book, Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And there are 3 steps to the process, but each step employs questions. Yeah. Now, in the book, there are lots of tactics, and these are maneuvers in conversation. Things like Taking the Roof Off, and Just the Facts, Mammon, Rhodes Scholar, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Inside Out. I have all these names for them. But the main tactic, which really represents the game plan, I call Columbo, after the infamous Lieutenant Columbo. And by the way, this is like 40 years ago on TV, right? Yeah. I have never spoken in a country and talked about Columbo that there weren't people in the audience who knew who he was.
Yeah,
he's
great.
Very well known as an icon, right? Okay. Yeah. And what's so nice about Columbo, the character now played by Peter Falk, is that he was a detective, and he would come into the crime scene, a murder detective, and he's got this rumpled coat, he's got the cigar in his hand, and that's why when you opened the box, I thought these are Columbo cigars, but they were the DVDs. So you disappointed me there for just a split second, but I was glad to see the full range and he just was so disarming. I mean, he'd come in and scratch his head and mumble to himself, look around, and like he's deep in thought, and I mean, this guy is stupid. He looks like but he's stupid like a fox, right?
Yeah.
Because he's got a manner, he's got a plan, and at some point he'll put his fingers to ruffle brow, with that cigar sticking out there, like this here, and then he'll say, "There's something about this thing that bothers me, Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And so he gets the answer. "Oh yeah, well, you're very intelligent, that." One more thing, and then he one more things him to death, question after question. So, and he says, "I know this bothers people, but it's a habit. I can't help it." And so this is a habit that Christians ought to get into. They ought to get in the habit of asking questions.
Yeah.
Okay? And then I outline that in the book. Some particular steps in the game plan and particular questions that abet those steps. And I really am thankful for you putting the book up there. That's the 10th anniversary edition. I have gotten so much response from people about how this has radically changed their lives. Actually, that's the words they use. It's humbling to hear that, but it's very satisfying. This book changed my life because it gave them a way of maneuvering conversations that was more relaxing, less confrontation, less combat, looks more like diplomacy than D-Day, okay, that kind of thing. And therefore much more effective and more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Now, I want to just draw attention to something. You raised the question earlier, which is an appropriate question, that Jesus was deified. Hundreds of years after the fact. And I asked a question, and it was basically, why would anybody believe that's what happened? Now, that's the second Columbo question. How did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for thinking that? Lots of people don't realize that it's not the job of the person being challenged to defeat the claim. It is first the job of the person making the claim to defend it.
Yes.
This is called burden of proof.
Burden of proof, yeah.
All right. So, if the DA comes and knocks on somebody's door and says that you robbed the bank, then you get to say to the DA, district attorney, prove it, because the burden of proof is on the challenger.
Yes.
On the person who makes the claim. Same thing in your jurisprudence as well. So this is an important principle. It's part of the game plan, but if somebody else makes the claim, instead of taking the responsibility for refuting it, which we may not be able to do, we may not have the background or information or whatever. I was able to give some answers here because of my background, my training. But notice even with my training, I would first ask the question, well, why do you think that's the way it happened? You must have some reasons to think that all of this has been changed over time. And there are actually very practical reasons why you can't change documents that are written in the 1st century and then copied for 2 centuries and go all over the Mediterranean region and then decide in the 4th century that you're going to change them all. You can't get at them all. Is Daily Telegraph. That's a UK paper,
it's
right?
UK paper, yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So even today's issue of the Telegraph, you can't do that with. Just in England, you can't, because it's gone. It's delivered to all these places. You can't change all of those. So there's a practical problem there a lot of people haven't thought about. But in any event, the whole issue of having friendly conversations is really critical. And since I've had so many unfriendly conversations, and I was at fault in the vast majority of them, or at least I contributed to it, I wanted to find a way that we could do this better. And I noticed, by the way, Jesus asked over 300 questions.
Yeah, that was his primary technique, wasn't it?
Yes, in the Gospels. And so what I've done is kind of formalized a way of putting that into play. And it's been very effective in my life and very effective in others' lives. And what it does is it takes, if you follow the plan, you get the picture, and it's all there in the book. Lots and lots of illustrations of times I did it right. And a few times where I did it wrong, too. That's instructive, but if you follow that, I can pretty much guarantee that it will transform the quality of conversations that Christians have with their unbelieving with their non-Christian friends.
Yeah.
It's just it's so. I just checked at Amazon, and I've got now just that 10th anniversary edition, which has just been out for about 15 months.
So hold this up again.
Yeah, it's been 10 years. Then I did the 10th anniversary edition, and then that's been out for. But I have over 1,500 is 4.9 on Amazon. So I'm not trying to really, grandstand here, but I'm just pointing out this is really helping people.
Yeah, I would say it's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it to any serious Christian who wants to get involved in evangelism, which we really all should, and apologetics. And it's not a very expensive book either, so it's definitely one for the Christian library. Highly recommend this. 10 out of 10.
Thank you. Thanks so much. But it goes to the broader point, though, of the conversations that we have with non-Christians, people who don't agree with our view, is that it needs to be genial. It needs to be friendly. And you can accomplish that by drawing the other person out and letting the other person talk, but the conversation is guided by the questions you ask. So it's an odd situation here, Paul, where you can actually be in the driver's seat of the conversation, actually just like you are right now in this conversation, by the questions you ask. Our interview is going in the direction that you've predetermined. And I'm following along because of the questions that you ask. I'm doing all the heavy lifting here, I'm doing all the talking, but you're the one who's in charge and in the driver's seat. And this is exactly the same dynamic that I want to have in conversations with others who don't agree with my views.
That's wonderful. And I'm also a church pastor, as well as kind of doing Reasonable Faith as an apologist. And after reading this book, I actually did a couple of sermons. I guess I could call them sermons, but where I just asked questions of the congregation. I didn't actually really preach. So we kind of shared some scripture, then I kept asking questions. Why do you believe that? Where did you get that from? It's actually an amazing way of studying the Word of God.
Yeah. That's great. I hadn't heard that application before, but I'm glad to hear it now.
I wouldn't do it all the time, but every now and then I think it's very good. It creates lively debate and discussion.
Yeah, especially on Saturday night when you're a little short for words. You say, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to ask a lot of questions. That'll take care of my sermon. Good for you.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I actually want to commend that, because I think that having a session like that, every 2 months or something, is going to be really healthy for the congregation. And sometimes a turnabout is fair play. So pastor says, look, I have no sermon today. What I want to do is I want to hear your questions. And I'll do my best to answer your questions. Christians have a lot of questions.
They do, yeah.
And they don't have very many opportunities to have those questions answered. Now, this is what I do on my own broadcast, which I'm in my 30th year now doing that, and it's a Stand to Reason podcast as well, so people can go online wherever you get their podcast and look up Stand to Reason. You'll be able to benefit from that.
Okay.
But lots of people can come to my show to ask me questions because they can't find answers in the local congregation. And I think that sometimes pastors are a little bit leery of it because they don't want to look like they don't know the answers to a lot of questions. But I think it's actually healthy for a congregation for the pastor to say, that's a good question. I don't know. That's troubled me too. I'll do some work on it. But some questions aren't really answerable. You can only go so far with that, okay? But what it does is it communicates to the audience that, first of all, questions are okay. Secondly, that unanswered questions are also okay. That just because there are some unanswered questions, it does not tear apart the fabric of the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
We have so many things that substantiate it so well, we can live with some unanswered questions because every worldview has outliers. Every worldview has unanswered questions. Yeah. In my experience, though, the Christian worldview is the one that has the fewest, and has and what's left has the best explanation for the way things actually are.
Right. Okay, then. Just one more thing.
Yes, sir.
In closing, please could you share with our viewers today how they could start a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. And in a certain sense, it's not very complicated, but there's very, very good news regarding that issue. That's what the gospel means. The word gospel means good news. But no news is good news without bad news. In other words, in almost every case, the good news is a reversal of bad news. And this is something that's very important for people to understand in this regard. You know, Paul, there's something that everybody knows, no matter where they lived or when they lived. And they know that something is wrong with the world. And they also know, if they're honest with themselves, that the thing that is wrong with the world has to do with something that's wrong with every human being. We contribute to the problem of evil. It's not just out there somewhere, it's in us. And in our candid moments, we're aware of that. If we're in relationship with a significant other and we have harmed them badly, they are not going to be interested in a genuine renewal of that relationship unless that barrier is removed. A vital part of our understanding of reality that Jesus made very clear is that we all have something like that with God. There is a huge barrier. And by the way, we know it. We don't have to be persuaded of this. We feel guilty because we are guilty. And we are guilty principally to the sovereign of the universe, who we have rebelled against constantly. That problem has to be solved. Yeah. Right now, we're rebels. We want to be children. That's a relationship that is open to us, but we have to deal with the rebellion. And this is where Jesus comes in, because Jesus has made forgiveness possible for our rebellion through what he did as he lived on this earth and the way he died. And that is, very simply, he paid the debt that we owe. He paid that debt. Okay, there it is. Now what? Well, now you have to decide, very important question. Am I willing to bend the knee? Am I willing to say, like Jesus described, the tax gatherer, who is basically an extortionist in that culture, who is in the back of the synagogue, not bragging about his righteousness, but beating his breast and saying, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. If a person is willing to do that, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner, and the Lord they're speaking to is Jesus, because he provided mercy, then he will be justified, just as Jesus said regarding that parable. The problem of rebellion and the guilt associated it goes away. It's because the debt then is paid by Jesus. It's not an issue anymore. This is why Paul said in Romans 5, he said, therefore, being justified by our trust in Jesus, that's what the Bible means by the word faith, justified by our trust in him, we have peace with God. In other words, God's not mad at us anymore. We're not in this fight anymore. And now we're in a different relationship, and that's a father-son relationship, and that's the relationship that we're after. But that's the crux. That's, well, ironically, I made a pun. The crux means the cross. That's the critical point, all right? And that is seeing what Jesus has done, affirming it, thanking him for it, confessing our need for it, and turning and following him. It's a change of life here. It's not just an academic decision. I'm going to follow Jesus. Yeah. This is my life now because he has rescued me, and I'm going to be a son to the Father, God, the sovereign of the universe. And there's a whole bunch of good stuff that follows, and also hard stuff, because we've been screwing up our life for a long time, and God's going to turn it around little by little, and that's not an easy thing. But that's the heart of it, I think, Paul, an acknowledgement of our desperate need for him, and our willingness to trust him for what he's done for us, and then to follow him in that new relationship.
Wow, that's an outstanding answer. And it's been an incredible interview and discussion today. Thank you so much for your time. And so where can people get hold of you? Is it www.standforreason?
The organization is Stand to Reason. But
Stand to Reason, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's the acronym ST for 2R, STR. So if you go to str.org, you're there. and there you can, sign up for our podcasts. We have multiple podcasts. I do 2 hours a week in the kind that I described. I do another hour, two half-hour segments with another teammate. We answer questions on that, and then other team members have podcasts, and there's a lot there, and I hope people avail themselves maybe of the book or books, that we've done. But our goal is to help them walk more solidly with Christ and be better ambassadors for Jesus Christ. So str.org is the place to start.
And I strongly recommend your ministry to people.
Thank you so much,
God bless.
Paul.
Well, I'm Paul Lyndon Birtwell, and you've been watching Compelling Reason. Until next time, God bless you.